He was a chairman of NASDAQ. The SEC trusted him. Wall Street worshipped him. For 20 years, he returned 10% every single year. Rain or shine, crash or boom. The math was simple. The math was impossible. And the math was right there, in plain sight, for anyone who bothered to look. But nobody looked, because Bernie Madoff was too respectable to be a thief, too connected to be a fraud, too big to fail. Until December 11th, 2008, when his own sons turned him in, and the world discovered that $65 billion never existed. Not a single trade, not a single stock, just a spreadsheet, and a lie so big it fooled the smartest people on earth. The story: the man who sold AIR Bernard Lawrence Madoff was born in Queens, New York in 1938. His father was a plumber. His mother was a housewife. He wasn't poor, but he wasn't rich. He was just hungry. Hungry for respect. Hungry for status. Hungry for the kind of wealth that makes people whisper your name in country clubs. In 1960, at 22 years old, Madoff founded Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities with $5,000 he had saved from lifeguarding and installing sprinkler systems. He started as a market maker, a middleman who bought and sold stocks for other brokers. He was good at it. He was fast. He was reliable. By the 1980s, his firm was handling 10% of all NYSE volume. By the 1990s, he helped create NASDAQ, the electronic stock exchange that would eventually rival the NYSE. He became its chairman. He sat on boards. He donated to charities. He was a pillar of the Jewish community in New York, a philanthropist, a family man, and all the while, he was running the biggest fraud in history. The scheme was almost embarrassingly simple. Madoff told investors he was using a split-strike conversion strategy, a legitimate options trading technique that supposedly generated steady returns regardless of market conditions. He promised 10 to 12% annually. Every year, no losses, no volatility, just a smooth, upward line on a graph. Investors gave him their money. He gave them statements showing trades, profits, and growth. But there were no trades. There were no profits. There was no growth. Madoff never bought a single stock, never made a single option trade. He simply deposited new investors' money into a single Chase Manhattan bank account and used it to pay returns to older investors. Classic Ponzi scheme. The oldest trick in the book. But Madoff's genius wasn't the scheme. It was the packaging that he didn't advertise. He didn't cold call. He made people beg to invest. He created an aura of exclusivity. You can't just give him money, people said. You need an introduction. His client list read like a who's who of global wealth: Steven Spielberg, Elie Wiesel, Kevin Bacon, Kyra Sedgwick, the Royal Bank of Scotland, HSBC, Swiss private banks, pension funds, university endowments, charities, Holocaust survivors. Elie Wiesel's foundation lost $15 million. Wiesel later said, "We gave him everything, our life's work, and he knew who we were. He knew what that money meant." Madoff had personally courted Wiesel, attending his speeches, praising his books, promising to protect the foundation's legacy. He stole from a man who had survived Auschwitz. The returns were too good to question. The man was too respectable to doubt. And the regulators were too incompetent to investigate. Harry Markopolos was a financial analyst and fraud investigator who first figured out Madoff's scheme in 1999. He ran the numbers. He reverse-engineered the split-strike conversion strategy. He proved mathematically, beyond any doubt, that Madoff's returns were impossible. He wrote a 21-page report titled "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud" and sent it to the SEC. The SEC did nothing. Markopolos sent more reports in 2001, 2005, 2007, and 2008. He detailed exactly how the fraud worked. He named names. He provided spreadsheets. He begged the SEC to investigate. He was ignored, dismissed, told that Madoff was too big and too respected to be a criminal. The SEC examined Madoff twice, in 2005 and 2007, and cleared him both times. They never asked for trade confirmations, never verified his holdings, never checked if his claimed trades actually happened at IN 2006. The SEC's New York office recommended closing Madoff's investment advisory business. The SEC's Washington headquarters overruled them. Madoff's niece, Shauna Madoff, was married to an SEC attorney. His brother, Peter Madoff, was a compliance lawyer. The fox wasn't just in the henhouse. He was building the henhouse. Meanwhile, the money kept flowing. By 2008, Madoff was managing, on paper, $65 billion for 4,800 clients. In reality, there was maybe $300 million left in the account. The rest was gone. Spent on fake returns. Spent on lifestyle. Spent on keeping the illusion alive for one more day. The 2008 financial crisis killed him. Not metaphorically. Literally. When Lehman Brothers collapsed and the market crashed, investors panicked. They wanted their money back. $7 billion in redemption requests flooded in. Madoff didn't have $7 billion. He didn't have $700 million. He had maybe $200 million. The math finally caught up with him on December 10th, 2008. Madoff sat down his sons, Mark and Andrew, in his Manhattan apartment and told them the truth. "It's all one big lie," he said. "It's a giant Ponzi scheme." He said he was going to give himself up. He had already planned bonuses for key employees, $173 million in retention payments to keep them quiet. He had drafted his confession. Mark and Andrew didn't protect him. They went to the FBI. The next morning, December 11th, 2008, 2 FBI agents arrested Madoff at his apartment. He was wearing a Rolex. He was calm. He had known this day was coming for years. The world exploded. The $65 billion figure made headlines globally, but the real number was worse. The $65 billion was the total on fake statements. The actual cash loss was closer to $17.5 billion, still the largest fraud in history, but representing real money from real people. The rest was phantom profits that never existed. Dreams, numbers on a page, air. The aftermath was a massacre of trust. Thousands of investors lost everything. Charities collapsed. Pension funds evaporated. The Wilpons, owners of the New York Mets, lost hundreds of millions and were forced to sell the team. The Pickar Foundation, which had given $268 million to MIT, Harvard, and Jewish causes, shut down entirely. Its founder, Jeffrey Pickar, had actually extracted $7.2 billion in fake profits from Madoff, more than anyone else. He died in 2009, drowning in his swimming pool. His widow returned $7.2 billion to the victims' fund. It was the largest forfeiture in history. Madoff's own family was destroyed. His wife, Ruth, was ostracized. She was forced to give up her homes, her jewelry, her reputation. She lives in obscurity now, reportedly in a modest condo in Connecticut. His sons, Mark and Andrew, were never charged. They claimed they didn't know. But the stigma destroyed them. Mark Madoff hanged himself in his apartment on December 11, 2010, exactly 2 years after his father's arrest. He left behind a wife and 2 children. Andrew Madoff died of cancer in 2014, still insisting he was innocent. Bernie Madoff himself pleaded guilty in 2009. He was sentenced to 150 years in federal prison. At 71, it was a death sentence. He died in 2021 at the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina, at age 82. His last years were spent in prison, reportedly respected by other inmates because of his wealth of knowledge about finance. The irony was lost on no one. The real tragedy of Madoff isn't the money. It's the trust. He didn't just steal cash. He stole the belief that smart people can protect themselves, that regulators exist to prevent fraud, that wealth and respectability mean integrity. The SEC had been warned explicitly, repeatedly, with mathematical proof, and they did nothing. The banks that funneled money to Madoff, HSBC, UBS, Royal Bank of Scotland, claimed they had no idea. They collected fees while their clients burned, and the victims? Many were not greedy. They were careful. They diversified. They checked credentials. They invested with a man who was chairman of NASDAQ, who sat on regulatory boards, who was recommended by friends they trusted for decades. Madoff didn't exploit greed. He exploited trust. He weaponized respectability. Harry Markopolos, the man who saw it all, still gives speeches about what went wrong. The SEC, he says, is a failed regulator. They don't have the expertise. They don't have the courage. They don't have the will to go after the powerful. He estimates there are 20 to 30 Madoff-level frauds operating right now, today in plain sight, with returns that don't make sense and auditors who don't ask questions. I think about Bernie Madoff sometimes. Not as a monster, but as a mirror. He was a man who wanted to be loved, who wanted to be important, who built a wall of lies so high that he couldn't see over it anymore, who kept the scheme running not because he needed more money. He had more than he could ever spend, but because stopping meant admitting he was a fraud. And he couldn't bear to be a fraud in a world where he had worked so hard to be respected. The $65 billion was never real, but the need for it to be real, that was very real. The need of investors to believe in magic returns. The need of regulators to believe they were doing their jobs. The need of Wall Street to believe that wealth equals wisdom. Madoff sold all of us a story we wanted to hear, and we bought it for 20 years, with our eyes wide open. The next time someone promises you 10% returns with no risk, remember Bernie Madoff. Remember that the chairman of NASDAQ was a thief. Remember that the SEC was warned 5 times and did nothing. Remember that the smartest people in the world, Spielberg, Wiesel, Nobel laureates, were fooled by a spreadsheet and a smile. And remember that the fraud wasn't hidden. It was in plain sight. The math was impossible. The math was obvious. And the math didn't matter, because we don't trust math. We trust faces. We trust titles. We trust the man who looks like he belongs. Bernie Madoff belonged, until he didn't. And by then, $65 billion was already gone. The biggest fraud in history wasn't a genius scheme. It was a simple lie, told by a respectable man, believed by people who should have known better, and ignored by regulators who were supposed to protect them. And the scariest part? It's probably happening again. Right now, somewhere, with someone you trust.